Fly fishing from a pontoon boat for trout in lakes, making your own leader. Before we start looking at leader formulas, here's something to consider. There are some who prefer fluorocarbon leaders over mono. They say that it is less visible in the water. But let's look at the water clarity of mono leader in a lake. I'd always heard that monofilament line reflects light. Of course, if you lay it down on a surface like this in regular light, it does reflect light almost all the way. But does it do the same in water? So I took a regular knotted 9-foot leader and I put red paint on each of the knots for each of the sections of the leader. Then I turned around and I tied on a standard calibatus fly and planned a trip to Frog Lake to see if this was true. When we arrived at the lake, the water was clear with a bright sun and a few little clouds. There was some wind on the water. Underneath, however, it was quite a different story. It was very, very turbid looking, and this is about 5 feet from shore. We went out to about the 9-foot section, and I lowered my Geek Pro camera, and my partner took his intermediate line and cast it about 4 feet in front of me and presented the fly as he would as he was fishing with a calipatus in this water. He cast the line 3 times, all in front of the camera, in front of me, presenting, and I was keeping the camera in a way that I was sure that I was catching any picture of the leader as it was going by. I thought, if this is the result, then I wonder if the fish can see the fly and the fish will take the fly. I went ahead and presented the fly in the same fashion that my partner had when we were filming it with the camera. And on the very first cast, I was surprised when I hooked a fish. I turned around and slowly brought him in, as I normally do. When I brought him in, I went ahead and measured the fish to see exactly how big he was. He turned out to be a little over 9 inches. I was really, really surprised. And I was wondering, wow, what a result. Everything turned out entirely different than we had thought it would be. Why you should tie your own leaders. Here's a few reasons why you should consider tying your own leaders. There's a problem with knotless leaders, and I'll show you why. If you want to use the river leader formula, it will not work well in lakes. I will show you how to make your own leader for lakes. We need to beware of the X factor information when tying. And when making a tippet, size will be determined by the hook to leader ratio. More on that later. For my leader formula, you buy $20 worth of leader and make 9 of your own 9-foot leaders for about $2.25 each. Or make a single leader and then add tippet to them for only $2 per year. My leader is designed to give you the advantage over the fish. Let's look at each of these things in more detail. The problem with knotless leaders. Let's take a look at the problems that knotless leaders can cause you. Let's talk about knotless leaders. Knotless leaders were actually invented by DuPont in 1920. It uses a special extrusion process. So they take the material and stretch it with machines that select the exact length, and then so the diameter changes. It actually is set from 20 to 30 pounds here, and at the end it'll be anywhere from 2 to 6 pounds or even less. This allows the leader to turn over much better. Now, a lot of people have gone to knotless leaders
because they believe that, well, there used to be an old saying that, oh, you didn't want to use a knotted leader because in a lake that the algae would actually collect on the knots, and when those knots got full of algae, of course the fish wouldn't bite. Well, I've been fishing for 15 years. I've made 230 fishing trips, and I've only had algae on one knot 3 times. So I don't think that that holds true as much as some people think it should. So now once you start using your leader, that's where the problem comes up. Every time you tie a fly on, you take about an inch off the leader, an inch here and an inch here and an inch here, and pretty soon you've used a lot of your leader. And you go, boy, do I tie tippet on or not? So you have to kind of watch when you're casting to see what's going on. And now this started at 9 feet. Well, now it could be about 8, or it could be even 7 feet. You're not quite sure. So the problem is you have to do things by trial and error. Now you select the length, and if it's too small, or if the diameter of the tippet that you put on is too big, then a line will just lay out there in a weird way. It won't lay out flat, and it won't taper to a nice smooth return. So, what if you want to determine the diameter? There's a tool that costs $30, and that tool will tell you what the diameter is here and is here. But then you've got to figure out, what poundage of leader to buy to make up this difference. And then you got to make sure when you're doing your leaders that when you get to a certain point, that's where you'll attach your leader or your tippet. Otherwise, you'll need a different type of leader that you're purchasing. So that makes it rather interesting. But once you selected the diameter of the leader you want to put here, then you have another issue. It's called the hook to leader ratio. Now there's a slide that explains this in detail on the presentation. It'll come up in a few minutes. Basically, it means that if you select a leader diameter for a hook that is too large, when you tie the hook on and cast it, the hook will actually break off the end of the leader. Have you ever tied a hook on your fly and cast it out, and then when you bring it back in, the fly's gone? That's what happened. The diameter and the hook are not set properly according to the ratio, and therefore you lose it. So you've got to be very careful about what you select here. The other issue you've got is length. If it's too long, if it's really long, then you've got to select maybe 2 sections, or maybe you have to select 3. You're not quite sure. It falls this way, so you've got to make a difference in some way so that it'll seem to fall out more evenly. Again, it's all trial and error. So, like I said, the length you just don't understand it. So now let's say you want to tie. Let's say you get everything right, and you got a good leader, and you got figured out where you're going to put on your tippet and what diameter it is, and it matches the hook ratio, and everything's good. Then you turn around and you decide you want to tie a 12-foot leader. Well, now everything changes. You have to turn around and run this whole process again just to determine what the tippet would be now that this is 12 feet long. It gets to be very frustrating. When I first started, I used knotless leaders, just like, I had friends tell me, oh, I'm going to use the knotless leader and then put on the tippet. I said, oh, okay, cool, So I started out with knotless leader, and when I got to a certain point, and I put on some, I thought, well, I'll just put on some 6-pound. I tried that. No. I tried some 8-pound. No. I tried some 10-pound. 10-pound worked, but wait a minute. I don't want 10-pound down here. I want a smaller net. So then I had to figure out what the length would be. And it became very, very frustrating to the point that I just would go ahead and, if the leader got really short, I'd just throw it away and buy another leader. I did this for 2 years trying to figure out this everything so it would work and flow smoothly. I spent $87 on leader. And I said to myself, maybe I need to go to knotted leader. So I went on the internet and started looking for knotted leaders, and the only leader I could find was river formulas, not lake formulas. And river formulas won't work in lakes that well. There's a presentation later on that'll explain that to you as well. So what do? Well, that's when I decided, okay, a formula is based on a certain percentage of line for a butt, a middle, and a tippet. I'm going to find out what that formula is and alter it so it can be used on lakes.
River formulas will not work well in lakes. Some think the solution is to buy knotted leader, except most of the leaders available on the market are tied for rivers and not for lakes. I searched the internet to find knotted leaders for lakes, and I'm sorry I could not find any for sale. Here's a sample of river leader formulas, but they have too many knots to be used on lakes. Here we see that the number of the knots is from 7 to 10 on just a 9-foot leader. The tippet in red are as small as 4 sections that are only about 6 to 8 inches. This makes the knots visible to the fish and can spook them. The strike ratio for a trout is about 18 inches. If the fly is close to the knot, then the fish sees both of them moving at the same time. He may refuse the fly. This usually does not affect flies that are fished deep. This type of leader may work well in rivers, but will not work well in lakes. Also notice the X rating list for use on the leaders. The X factor of leaders differs from manufacturer to manufacturer. Beware the X factor. As you can see by this chart, 2X for one manufacturer has a different strength than 2X from another. You cannot rely on the X factor when you're tying leaders. You have to tie them based on the diameter of the different sections of the leader, or by the strength of each section. But that brings us to another issue called the hook to leader ratio. Hook to leader ratio. It influences the diameter of the tippet for the hook size that you want to use. If you tie hooks outside the ratio, they can break off when you cast. Have you ever casted a fly out? When you bring it back in, it's gone. So by the chart, you can see if you want to use a 6 or 8 hook, then the tippet diameter has to be 0.009 or 0.010. For a size 10 hook, you have to use either 0.009 or 0.008 leader for your tippet. If you want to use hook sizes of 10, 12, or 14, you have to use 0.008 leader tippet. If you change to a size 8 hook, then you'll need to do a change on the tippet of your leader. You'll have to change the tippet to a 0.009. You can see how this can influence how your leader will lay out when you cast it. So you have to take into consideration the hook to leader ratio when you select the hook size you want to use on the leader that you've created. How my leaders for lakes are made. Here are the 3 leader formulas that I use. Over time, I found out the top 2 actually work better in rivers, and the bottom one is excellent for lakes. They're broken down by butt and by middle and by tippet. The numbers on top represent the pound of each of the leaders. For example, 20 pound, 15 pound, 12 pound, 8 pound, and 6 pound. The numbers below in yellow are actually the inches that you would tie to create a 9-foot leader. You'll notice that you can make all 3 leaders just using these 5 poundage materials. On the presentation that follows, we'll discuss more how this 48-28-28 leader, the one on the bottom, is most effective on lakes.
Okay, then, here is my leader formula. I always use Maxima leader. It has a shelf life of forever. So you never have to worry about it being brittle. Now, in the slide before, you saw information about the different distances used to create the leaders. And like I said, 2 of them work well for rivers, but only the 3rd one works well for lakes, and I'll show you why. When you go to make the leader, look on that slide and use the pound per section and the inches per section to create a 9-foot leader. So all leaders are made with a butt, a middle, and a tippet. The most popular formula on the internet right now, it's a formula called 60-20-20. It's actually referred to as 60%. But when I did my research in 2003, I actually found two other formulas that could be used in lakes as well. There was one called 54% and one called 48%. But of these leaders, the 48% is the very best, and here's why. The strike distance of a trout is 18 inches. That means when a trout approaches a fly 18 inches away, he turns around and he makes a choice to hit it and then moves forward to it. When you have a 60% tippet, you have 22 inches. Now between 22 and 18, there's only 4 inches. So you can only tie 4 flies on that. The reason you want to do that is because if you let this tippet get lower than 18 inches, then when you tie a fly on it and pull it through the water, the fish sees the fly and the knot. And two things moving parallel, that's unnatural. So a lot of times it spooks them, so they won't hit the fly. Now, if you're using a line that's sinking, well, the sinking line will take it down, 5 feet, and at 5 feet and more, the knots are probably not seen. I seem to have better luck with when I'm down in that area if my tippet is shorter. But when you're working emergers or working in the middle of the lake where the light can make a difference and hit those knots, you want to make sure that you have that distance there so that the fly and the knots don't come into the range of where the trout is pursuing it. Now at 54%, the end of the leader is 24 inches. And with that, you can tie about 6 flies. Like I said, it's about an inch per fly. Now, but with 48, you actually have 28 inches. So that gives you 10 flies before you have to change your leader. Well, a spool of leader contains 27 yards of material. Now, for you to pull out 28 inch sections, you can actually get 34 sections out of a 27-yard leader. Now, if you figure 1 inch per fly, then out of that total leader there, you can get 340 flies before you have to buy a new leader. 340 flies. It takes me over 2 years to have tied on 340 flies, considering 10 or 15 at a lake or 1 or 2 at a lake, because it all depends on how many flies you have to add on to get the fish to do what you want them to do. Now, the formula is set up that if you change only the 8-pound and continue changing the 6-pound, when you start changing the 8-pound, you will actually change that 30 times per spool. That means if you use 6-pound and 8-pound together, you can tie over 10,000 flies before you have to change the leader. I've had my 9-foot leaders since 2004, and it's 2017 now. I have only changed this and this in great frequency, and I'm now into the section of the butt that's 12-pound. And I'm only pulling an inch at a time, so that's gonna, every time I pull an inch off there and run this process, that's 10,000 flies. So it's going to take a long time for me to extinguish with that leader. So when you look at this, it makes your selection for leader very simple. Every time you come to a knot, you tie on 6 pound. Every time you come to the second knot, you tie on 8 and 6. And then accordingly, according to the formula that you saw on the presentation. So write the figures down that represent the sections of the butt and the middle and the tippet and what the poundage of those sections are and what the length is, because it's actually put down in inches for you to make it easy for you to understand. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you try this leader, and I hope it works as good for you as it does for me. Thanks a bunch.
For tying leaders, a blood knot tool is used to tie each piece. Sometimes it can be frustrating trying to tie these knots on the lake. A blood knot tool is a very good investment, but there are some problems with the ones on the market. Most of the tools available do not float. They can be very expensive, over $30 a piece. What about making your own? My design is easy to make, it floats, and only costs about $2.25 to make if you share all the materials with other fly fishermen. Check out the video on this site for materials and how to make a blood knot tool.